Haley, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do at North Star and why you're so generous and willing to present with us today?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Haley Morrissey. I work at North Star Behavioral Health. My background is in art and recreation therapy. That's what I did at North Star for many years before doing what I do now, which is basically community relations, where I became a partner with the Juneau Suicide Prevention Coalition, and I get to travel around the state doing different kinds of trainings like ACEs training or different kinds of suicide prevention trainings, as well as just encouraging our community and getting our community access to mental health services, which is very, very important. I'm a really big advocate for suicide prevention in Alaska, just with the work that I've done and just life experiences and stuff like that and living in this state. It is really important. And so with adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, it's such a crucial thing. So I'm really, really stoked that folks are here and wanting to learn about this. For the state of Alaska, if you're an educator, if you are a student, if you're anybody that's working with kids or humans in general, I think this is important information to have. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to share my screen, and I do have some slides that we're going to be viewing today. We're going to start just by talking about the data. And some of this stuff can be, I just want to let everyone know that some of this stuff can be triggering. There's a lot of information in this training, and if any of this stuff gets too heavy for anybody, that is totally acceptable. If you need to take a break, or if maybe this is something that isn't for you and you maybe need to come back to it, that's totally okay. But I just want to let everyone be aware that there could potentially be some triggers in the information that we're going to cover. So just be mindful of that. And let's see if I can work sharing my screen. Here we go. All right. All right, so just to begin, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. It is important, just any presentation that we do, since I do travel around the state, it's important to be aware and mindful of the land that you are on right now, wherever you might be. Just be mindful that there were Alaskans, other Alaskans here before us. And so just being mindful that the land that we are on and the land that we're watching this, Alaska has had a lot of historical trauma as a part of this state. So just being mindful that that exists. And so now I just want to share a little bit about what to expect. And like I already said, there are, so we're going to go a little bit over the research study. So we're going to talk about the original data of the ACEs study, the health outcomes, and what exactly they were looking for, and what you might, what they thought maybe they would come to expect. We're going to talk about resilience building, strategies to build in yourself, children that you might work with, or families that you might work with. And then once again, if any of the content is triggering, that is okay. There's support available. So please let us know if you are needing support for anything that we might cover today. So the first thing I just want to point out is memories of our early experiences are stored in our body. There is a really great book. If anybody is interested, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And basically what that is going to talk about, it's going to talk a little bit deeper about how our bodies physiologically will remember things that our brains don't. So if you're somebody that possibly has experienced trauma in the first year or 2 years of your life, you might not remember it, but your body might. And so a lot of folks, this is going to be stuff that the data that we're talking about is going to be trauma that's experienced before the age of 18. So adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, occur before the age of 18 years old. So a lot of us might experience trauma afterwards, like think about veterans, folks that have experienced heavy combat or war. there is trauma that's experienced there, but it doesn't have the same effect on the brain as trauma that's experienced in early childhood, and how that physiologically can change the brain. ACEs have the potential to harm brain development and our adult health. I think it's important to point out that it has the potential to harm brain development. Just because somebody has experienced trauma before the age of 18 does not mean that the brain will be physiologically changed, but it definitely has the potential. So going into the ACE study, this study was, whoops, let's go back. This study happened in 1995 to 1997. That was the original ACE study before any of this information was ever found out. So it was performed by two different doctors, Vincent Felitti and Robert Onda, at an organization, an HMO, a managed healthcare facility called Kaiser Permanente. For those of you guys that are maybe from the lower 48, you might have heard of it. But all these guys had insurance through Kaiser Permanente. So 17,000 participants were part of this study, which is a statistically significant sample size. And they were from the ages of 19 through 92, with the average age of 57. What's important about this is, so this was a racially diverse group, but not necessarily economically diverse. Because all of these folks were part of Kaiser Permanente, that does go to say that all these folks did have insurance. So it's not even measuring folks that have ACEs scores that, you know, don't have insurance. 60% of these individuals that were gathered were college educated. 70% of these individuals were white. So just putting that information out there. With ACEs studies that have occurred in the future, which we'll talk about, more of that stuff has been taken into consideration, but we're just talking about the original ACEs study here. So from this original study, there was a list of 10 different adverse childhood experiences that were measured, and it was split into two different categories: personal trauma and household dysfunction. And I'm going to go over those 10 different things right now. So there was both neglect, both emotional and physical. So that's split into two different ones. It is listed here as one, but emotional and physical neglect were two separate categories. What was emotional and physical neglect was outlined in the study, so is defined if you look at the original study. Physical abuse was measured, emotional abuse, and let me move this little guy real quick. Sexual abuse, substance abuse, I believe that's parental divorce or separation, mental illness. So, and when we say household dysfunction, these are things that are occurring in the household with the person who is under 18. So if there's substance abuse taking place in the house, if your parents are having problems, if someone in your family is experiencing mental illness, battered mothers was one of the categories that was measured. And then if somebody in the family had criminal behavior or was incarcerated. So what they found is individuals that had experienced one of those 10 things in their household, it had an effect on health outcomes, which was very curious. What caused these folks, Felitti and Onda, to originally study it is they found that people weren't able to stick on their treatment plans. Specifically, I believe the original thing was people that were on obesity medication. People were not able to stay on their treatment plan, which is originally why they decided, well, let's track and see what these folks had been through in their childhood. And they found that 33% of the folks that were, of these 17,000 of the sample size, 33% had 0 ACEs, 26% had 1, 16% had 2, 10% had 3, 16% had 4+. And so what they also found that's important to point out was 4+, 5+, 6+. There's not necessarily a statistically significant number if it's 4 or more. They found that the health outcomes are pretty much the same if it's 4, 5, or 6 plus. So with this data, so we have 0, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus, and they found that there was a dose response relationship. So it's basically, let's go back to that. Dose response relationship, and so basically the increase of response of an organism as a function of exposure to a chemical or an event. So in this case, the event is trauma, and the response is going up. So we see that the percent of health outcomes there on the side, if they have 5 or 4 more plus, the health outcomes are rising. So there's more and more increased health problems with folks that are experiencing more ACEs in their childhood. And so we have gathered some data that I wanted to show you guys today. We have some data from the Advisory Board on Alcoholism and Drug Administration, as well as the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. And for any folks that are watching right now that are interested in more data about this, all of this can be found on the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services. There's been multiple ACE studies produced here. But I thought I wanted to pick some of these out because I think they're important. So this one right here, we have a 10-state sample. So 53,784, and then we have a sample from Alaska, just Alaska. And this is percentage of adult Alaskans' adverse childhood experiences compared to 10-state average. What do you guys see? I know that's rhetorical, but obviously we can see the green there, which represents Alaskan, is pretty significantly higher. If we're looking at the incarcerated household members, it's over halfway. It's 11.3 versus 5.7. So higher in every category, which is pretty significant. Moving forward, we took some data from the Anchorage Municipality, Behavioral Health Region, and statewide percentage of individual ACEs. So just looking at like Anchorage with a huge amount, like most of our population in Alaska is coming from Anchorage. And then of course we have Fairbanks and some of the other more populous regions of Alaska. But if we're looking at Anchorage versus Alaska, we have pretty tied percentages up there. The Anchorage Municipality is slightly higher in some categories, which is pretty interesting, considering we're the most densely populated city, but Alaska, the population in general, is pretty close to that. So that's something interesting that I thought would be important to point out. For the Anchorage Municipality Behavioral Health Region and statewide percentage of individual ACEs for Alaska Natives, we have Alaska Natives in green, and we have Anchorage Municipality in blue. And this I find, well, I'll open up to any questions here. What do you guys think about this? Personally, I've had a lot of people ask me questions about why with populations of Alaska Native people, why are there such high amounts of ACEs compared to the rest of the population? A lot of this is going to come from historical trauma, and there's a lot of studies that specifically measure that. Erin, do we have any questions on any of this so far?
There's a delay going to Facebook, so it'll probably take a second to get questions on Facebook where most folks are watching. Sure. It takes like 20 to 30 seconds, so I think they'll have questions in a minute. Okay. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on, and then if there's any questions about any of this data, we'll take a little pause after it. Looking at the next slide, we have percentage of Alaskan adults who reported frequent mental distress. So this is any sort of mental distress, whether it's, you know, having to go home from work because of a mental episode of some sort, but for as we can see, once again, a dose-response relationship. Folks that have higher ACE scores report more high percentages of mental distress. We also have this data here talking about binge drinking by ACE score. Once again, another dose response. And I don't know, it's just
like specifically for the mental distress, that's a pretty big jump. We have 3.9 and then it almost doubles again. And then we have 18.1 for 4+. So, and this is the data. This is from 2017. So this is the stuff that's like happening with our neighbors and people that we are in communities with. And it's all from things that have happened in childhood. So moving along, this is a quote from Dr. Vincent Felitti that I think is really just kind of important to point out. So what are often viewed as public health problems are often personal solutions to long concealed adverse childhood experiences. So just kind of explaining this, we can look at maybe somebody that has a diagnosis of alcohol misuse. What this can potentially consider is maybe somebody that has alcohol misuse disorder, potentially, you know, some of those different kinds of health outcomes like that, or possibly like obesity or diabetes or asthma. There is the potential that maybe some of those individuals have higher ACE scores than others. And it's just, that is how these individuals are coping with trauma and things that have happened in early childhood years. So this next graph I really, really like because we can view ACEs as an oil spill. So we have a list of different ACEs around here, or sorry, different health outcomes. So we have anxiety, marijuana use, alcohol binge drinking, a plethora of different things that we might consider just different health problems experienced in healthcare. And then the percentage preventable by addressing ACEs. So the oil spill that just showed up on the screen, that is these problems that can be attributed, and the percentages that can be attributed to adverse childhood experiences. So things before the age of 18. So for suicide, 67% of suicides in the state of Alaska can be potentially attributed to having ACEs in childhood. 61.4% for conditions disturbed 14+ days of work activity. And just to explain that, that would be like having to miss 14+ days of work or having to go home early because of some sort of health issue. 61.4% of that can be attributed to ACEs. Life dissatisfaction is 67.2%. Disability interrupted day, so it's any disability, 55.7%. Anxiety is 55.7%. Marijuana use is 53.3%. And just because when I first saw this graph, it was a little confusing, just to explain it, that's out of 100. So out of the 100% of all these different things, so like 100% would be the total, 54.3% of those that use marijuana can be attributed to ACEs. 35.3%, or sorry, 35.5% alcohol binge drinking, 36.7% tobacco use, 22.2% of asthma, and 40% of recent depression. Those are some really, I find that unbelievable. It's pretty crazy that all of those different things can be attributed to ACEs. So moving along, what counts as an ACE? What are some different things? So what is to say that certain things can cause trauma versus other things? And so looking at that, the big thing, the big factor that's gonna cause one thing to be considered an adverse childhood experiences versus another thing is this notion of toxic stress. So prolonged activation of stress response system in the absence of supportive relationships. So one person that maybe has experienced some of these ACEs, if they have supportive relationships in their life, which we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the message of hope and resilience and how the brain can be changed back after potentially experiencing ACEs. It's this element of toxic stress. So that is why some people that have experienced some of these things in early childhood maybe don't have the same health outcomes as others. It's whether or not it's toxic stress. And we'll talk about what exactly toxic stress even is here in a little bit. But there is a video that I do want to show you, but some different things for current times. We can look at what could be potentially some ACEs happening right now for Alaska's children, or children just in general. We can look at things like bullying, okay, especially with the age of the internet and with everything going on right now, like looking at potentially like cyberbullying or things with social media. We can look at loss of culture. So for Alaska Native populations, this is huge, especially like for people coming over to Alaska in late 1800s and early 1900s and literally stripping away Alaska Native culture. I've heard a story from an artist that I know that lives in Point Hope, Alaska, and she was telling me the story about her mother and how colonizers came and would literally spank children for speaking in their traditional Inupiaq tongue. That was not something that was allowed to be spoken in this particular boarding school. So being punished for using the language that you were born and raised with, absolutely, like you can see why that could potentially cause health outcomes and kind of a cyclical type of thing happening with some of these rural communities, which is really unfortunate, but there is hope. Poverty, looking at, you know, if you're not sure if you're going to come home to cabinets of food or wondering where you're going to get your next meal for a child, that obviously that's going to cause some stress. We can look at, if you guys are brainstorming about things happening right now, we can think about, you know, coronavirus. Could that potentially be something that is causing toxic stress for young people right now? 100%, and that's why strengthening our communities and having supportive communities and supportive relationships and mentorship and encouraging our teachers is such a big deal right now. So why are ACEs so detrimental? So this kind of goes into the neurobiology of the brain and understanding what is exactly happening in the brain when toxic stress is happening under these adverse childhood experiences. So just looking at the synaptic density, and for those of you in the audience that maybe don't know what synapses are the little ends of our neurons that fire and cause different behaviors. So synapses are basically just connections in the brain, little channels, different pathways that are kind of connecting to each other like a puzzle that really kind of explain our behaviors. It's kind of interesting looking at neurology and different things and why we do the different things that we do and why different connections are made. But if we look at the synaptic density from a child at birth, you know, you have a new, fresh child, you have, you know, you're going to be born with instincts, different things that are genetically ingrained in your brain. You're going to have certain reflexes that the body does for survival. And as you grow, your brain is going to develop more and more synaptic density, more and more different connections being made. So if any of you in the audience right now have children, think about, you know, if you have a 4, 5, 6-year-old, what are your kids doing at that age? They're, I'm assuming you guys are saying they're doing all the things. They're everywhere. They're running around, getting into trouble, asking so many questions. And that's because their brains are like sponges. They're learning, you know, the percentage of words that a child at 6 years old is learning compared to a 13-year-old. It's just absorbing so much. So all these different connections are being made. Synaptic density, looking at this scan, is much, much more dense. And then looking at a 14-year-old's brain, something occurs called pruning. And as we age, our connections get thinner. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just because certain talents that we're realizing that we have, or certain behaviors that we do, we're gonna pursue some things more than others. You know, when you're 6 years old, you wanna be an artist, you wanna be a firefighter, you wanna be a ballerina, you wanna do all these things. But as you grow, you're learning different things, that you're learning your interests, you're learning activities that you enjoy. And, you know, for a 14-year-old, maybe maybe you're in school and you're learning a different language, and that, you know, you're practicing Spanish versus doing all the things, or maybe you learn an instrument and that's something that you're spending your time practicing. Those synapses are going to grow, and maybe those synapses from when you wanted to be a firefighter when you were 6 years old, that's going to get pruned away, and that's okay. That's something that's natural. But kind of looking at some of this research is you can continue to build your synapses, and there is a little video next that I want to show you guys. I'm hoping the sound works. So for those of you guys that are a part of NAMI, I'm hoping you guys can tell me if the sound works from this video. This is from Harvard University, and it's going to explain synapses a little bit better. But, oh, sorry, I thought the video was next. But here's a little map of the brain. And let's see. We skip over that? No, sorry. I got my slides all mixed up. So we're going to talk about brain architecture here in a moment, but this is a really important graphic to kind of look at the different parts of the brain and what they are doing when we're experiencing different behaviors. So the important points I want to point out here are the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus, or sorry, the hippocampus. And the prefrontal cortex we can kind of view as like the driver. So if we look at like a car, the prefrontal cortex is making a lot of the decisions. It's choosing to stop at the stop signs. Oh, red, green light, yellow light, kind of logically understanding different behaviors and why we do things. It's also a big part of our personality, a big part of our reasoning and why we do different things. And then if we look kind of towards the middle of the brain and we have all that cushioning around, and honestly, like when we're looking at the design of the brain, these small little intricate parts that are in the middle of our brain, those parts tend to, it's called the older part of our brain, or the lizard brain, because they're the most primitive parts of our brain. And they're surrounded by all the cushy tissue because they are so crucial to processing and different things that happen. But looking at the middle, there's this little tiny part called the amygdala, kind of right there in the middle. And if we look at like the shape of your thumb, it's about the shape of your thumb, kind of like an almond size. And what the amygdala does is we can consider it the emotional center. It's going to be in charge of kind of like survival instincts, so perceived threats, or fight, flight, or freeze when we experience something, when we do experience stress or different things that could potentially be dangerous for us. That's the part that's going to react. And then we have this little piece, the hippocampus, that's pretty close to the amygdala, and that is going to store different things that have been processed. So memory, our memory pieces in there. So when we experience a strong emotion or something like a threat, the amygdala is going to get activated, and the hippocampus is going to kind of record what is happening. So when the amygdala gets kind of stimulated, oftentimes we have the prefrontal cortex that can like pick up on that and help process those kind of survival instincts. But something that happens like when we experience emotions that are super, super strong and adrenaline kicks in, if we look at our hand, I like to use the hand as a model. If we look at the amygdala, our thumb kind of right here in the middle of the brain, and then the prefrontal cortex kind of wrapping around it, this being the front, when that amygdala gets super strongly activated, we do something called flipping our lid. And rather than having the prefrontal cortex as the driver's seat, you have the amygdala in the driver's seat. And so it's going to bring you through things that are potential, threatening things for survival, but it's not necessarily going to be reasonable. It's not necessarily going to be processed fully because we're fighting for our lives, right? And oftentimes it can be real or perceived threats. So maybe we're not actually in danger, but that part of our brain is steering us as if we are in danger. And then the hippocampus is picking up on that and saying, okay, I need to remember this for the future. And this is how my brain needs to react in a future situation, if that makes sense. But I like to think of it as like a car. You know, you have a parent in the driver's seat. Say something happens to the parent, and then you have the kid in the back seat. Maybe like the kid could be representative of the amygdala. A kid that has to jump into the driver's seat and start driving and they don't have a driver's license, that's going to be a pretty potential for a car accident, right? So you can maybe think of it like that too. So we have this little video. I need folks to tell me if the sound works for you, because I'm not sure if it will. Here we go.
Yep, it's working.
A
Perfect.
child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic.
Are you able to turn it up at all? Because if we can hear it, but it's not loud enough.
provide a strong or weak foundation for all future
I'm trying.
brain cells or neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections are
Yeah, I think if this is as loud as it's going to be, I don't think it's loud enough for us to really
Okay.
get
All right. Sorry about that. We'll
that's
just
fine.
skip over the videos, and it might be good for time as well. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
Basically, that video just goes over kind of the things that we just talked about a little bit more in depth. And if any of you guys in the audience are interested in some of those videos, I can send them along to Aaron or to the Juneau Suicide Prevention Coalition, and those can be distributed out if that's something that people really, really want.
Yeah, we can do that. That'd be great.
Okay,
Thanks.
cool. So here's a brain scan. And I want you guys to look at this for a second. So looking at the front, and let's get rid of that. Looking at the front of the brain scan versus the back of the brain scan, the first slide that we see there is the healthy child. And then the second is a severe emotionally neglected child. And look at the different parts. We just kind of talked about some of the different parts of the brain where like the amygdala and the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex are located. From looking at these images, what are some of the different things that you guys see? And like we could do questions, but I'll just go ahead and explain it. In the healthy child, we see the activated parts, which the red in this particular slide is showing that it's active. Black obviously would be inactive, and we see in the healthy child the parts of the brain that are most activated are the front. We have the prefrontal cortex processing, reasoning, thinking of logical solutions to things. The back of the brain is not as much activated because it's not a fight or flight sort of situation. You know, they're not perceiving threat. And then if we look at the child that has severe emotional neglect, the parts of the brain that are most activated are the parts where the amygdala is located, where really it's those survival instincts parts of the brain, the older, more primitive part of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is not as much activated. And so it's kind of showing us that like the emotionally neglected child is much more on alert. They're much more, because the amygdala and the emotional center of the brain, they're waiting to, you know, check their surroundings. Survival instincts are just much more activated. And so it makes you kind of think about kids that have neglect in their lives and why a lot of these kids, especially kids that maybe you have in school, it's no wonder why a child with trauma might have a hard time remembering things or might have a hard time learning or possibly paying attention in class and might need some other kind of stimuli to help them with learning. Something that can be done in these cases are something called brain gyms. For any of you guys involved in education or those that work with kids, a brain gym can be done in something maybe called a brain break. So in the middle of like class, you might need to take a break just to kind of help stimulate the brain in maybe a different way or a different way of thinking of things. And something that can be used as a brain gym is something as simple as Simon Says, or something as simple as patting your head and rubbing your tummy. So what those games do, like what Simon Says, you're having to kind of think critically. With patting your head and rubbing your stomach, you're having to do something with one hand and a completely different behavior with the other hand. And what it is physiologically doing is it's connecting your left and your right hemisphere. Different information is being processed through the middle part of your brain called the corpus callosum, and it's having to go across. And so it's helping strengthen both sides and helping strengthen those pathways. So it's something really simple exercise that can help with, just help a child take a little break and help with processing. So let's look at the body stress response. All of us, I'm assuming everyone listening is in Alaska right now or has some connection to Alaska. So think about hiking in the woods, and especially in those beautiful, big, tall tree woods of Juneau. And think about what your body does when you see that little, you know, might see something brown up ahead or something black and it's moving. And what do? How does your body feel? I think about when I was backpacking a few weeks ago and we thought we saw a bear, but it was a bush. And I remember my body just feeling super cold and like literally feeling the adrenaline flowing through my body. Think about how that would feel. And if any of you guys have ever had a bear encounter or a moose encounter or a threatening animal encounter, it can be really scary. Gosh. Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of stories folks in the audience could share about this. But think about, let's see. So we're gonna talk about the body stress response and what is actually happening. So right there, we have a picture of our kidney. Right above it, we have the adrenal gland. And what the adrenal gland does is when we experience a threat or we're experiencing stress, is the adrenal gland secretes adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline makes your heart beat faster. Cortisol triggers the release of glucose into the bloodstream, which is also known as our blood sugar, which is going to give our body a boost of energy for action. So fight, flight, or freeze. For anybody that's ever run like track or cross country, it's that feeling you get right before the gun goes off. And cortisol is also notorious for like stress eating. If you're stressed, it can make us gain weight. So that is what is happening in your body when you experience some form of stress. And so looking at the example of the brown bear, what if you saw a bear every day? Okay, think about you're going home and there's a brown bear, metaphorically, living at your home or potentially at your school or at maybe your work or in your community. Maybe there's people in your life that are potentially a bear, and it's going to have that stress response and make your body experience that stress response every single day. And imagine the kind of different things that will happen to your body when that's a repeated thing. So let's talk about stress and exactly like the different kinds of stress. There is good stress. Obviously, as we can see here, it's called positive stress. So thinking about different kinds of tasks that we have to do in day-to-day, like maybe work, there's, we experience a lot of different kinds of stress in our day-to-day lives. So brief increases in heart rate, mild elevation in stress hormone levels. Think about like maybe taking a test. That could be an example of positive stress, or maybe a sporting event, training for something, getting married, like walking down the aisle, or for guys waiting there for your spouse, and the kind of adrenaline rush that creates. Or think about like a promotion. All of those things would be considered positive things, but they can be, they can cause us some temporary stress. Looking at the next kind, tolerable stress, would be serious stress. It's temporary, so temporary stress response. But the important thing about this is it's buffered by supportive relationships. So if you have supportive relationships in your life, this is going to be made a lot more easier than prolonged activation of stress and the absence of protective relationships. So I guess tolerable stress can quickly become toxic stress if we don't have supportive relationships or people in our life that can act as like a mentor for us, or communities that help strengthen us rather than tear us down. So think about like moving, or getting, having a divorce, or even potentially like event planning, or a change in jobs, or a loss of job, or, a worldwide pandemic. If these things can cause us a lot of stress, and it's really important to have protective relationships in our lives to help make that more tolerable for us. So obviously, as we've kind of talked about, stress manifests itself many different ways in the body. It definitely has a big effect on our body. So looking at the brain, for those of us that maybe experience different kinds of stress, it can cause difficulty in concentration, anxiety, can potentially cause, chemical instability in our brains, so depression, irritability in our mood, or mind fog. It can cause increased inflammation, tension, aches and pains, and muscle tightness. Higher cholesterol for our arteries, high blood pressure, increased risk of heart attack and stroke. So for, that would be related to our cardiovascular system and how stress can affect that. Our immune system can be affected by stress. So decreased immune function, lowered immune defenses, increased risk to becoming ill, increase in recovery time. And what this makes me think about is college students around like finals or midterms. It seems like there's always this outbreak of sickness around different campuses after these tests, because people are stressed out. And then it's like after the test, it's like people are just so much more susceptible to catching a cold or catching the flu because of just lowered immune system ability because of stress. Also can affect skin. So hair loss, dull, brittle hair, brittle nails, dry skin, acne, delayed tissue repair. Our gut. So think about little kids. This is actually one of the biggest ways that stress or toxic stress can manifest in children, is issues with constipation or bloating, diarrhea, nutrient absorption, pain and discomfort in the gut and bowels. And then reproductive system. So decrease in hormone production, decrease in libido, increase in PMS symptoms. So brain architecture. This, I really love this example of this slide because I think, let's go back. So under normal circumstances, the way our body and our brain processes our behavior, we can think of like the way our behavior works is kind of like a highway for just processing information. So we're going to observe, input, interpret, process, evaluate our options, make a plan, and then act. These are all things that are happening subconsciously in the brain when we choose to have a behavior. And that would be under, under regular circumstances. Now, if our brain is experiencing potentially like there's some sort of danger, some sort of threat, our brain can put up these little roadblocks. We'll observe, we'll interpret, they'll make kind of like a little express route to the action. So kind of like being in the woods, you're not necessarily processing, you're like, crap, I need to get out of here, there's a bear. I need to figure out what to do to keep myself safe. So we're observing, interpreting, and then acting. So that would be our fight, flight, or freeze, or that stress response system. We're not processing or evaluating our options or making a plan. Now, if this is happening every day, or if we are continuing this toxic stress and repeated, this is going to become a pathway in our brain. So this is kind of like when we looked at the synaptic density in the brain. This is going to become a pathway in our brain. It's things that were maybe pruned away. This is going to get built more and more built up over time, and it's strengthened. And this is going to become our normal way of acting. So we're observing, oh, there's danger, not going to process or evaluate options, immediately go into that alarm system and then act. And so that's why a lot of people that maybe have experienced trauma or experienced toxic stress in the past can be just very, very quick to jump to different things, because especially for like those of us that have worked in healthcare, or those of us who have worked in behavioral health, a lot of times we can be something called hypervigilant just because we're ready to jump into action because we've experienced different kinds of stress things, or folks that have been first responders. This is, you know, very, very quick to jump into action. Isn't necessarily a bad thing, but this is just something when you've experienced stress a lot, this is something that your body can just jump to. So think about if any of you guys in the audience have been in a car accident. Just kind of reflect on that right now and think about it, the next time you got in your car, especially if you were the driver. Think about what happened next. Like, what was your body doing the next time you went in the car? Probably maybe some nervousness. Maybe your body actually has some adrenaline and some different things going on there, just because of like your body experienced something very stressful, something potentially very life-threatening, and your body remembers that. So it's something that maybe your brain can manifest, and when you're in the car, it's like, oh, I can do this. But like once you're actually in the car, it creates something for us that it's kind of an interesting thing. And what I also like to think about is for all of us that were involved in the earthquake a couple years ago. I don't know about folks in Juneau, but for those of us that were in Anchorage, it was a pretty traumatic incident for a lot of us, and especially all the aftershocks that kept happening. A lot of people experienced stress response symptoms, especially after the aftershocks, because you're just prepping yourself. Oh my goodness, is it going to happen again? Are we going to all be involved in another earthquake? But I think the thing about that's important to point out is all of us were in the same thing together. And so everybody could kind of have other people to kind of like almost as a support system, because people understood what was happening. But say you were in a car accident and no one else was in the car with you, you don't necessarily have other people to talk about that with. So that could be comparable to maybe somebody who's experienced trauma at a young age and doesn't have anybody to talk about it because there's no one else who can really relate to that, or the feeling that there's no one else that can relate to it. And so it kind of creates this feeling of isolation. I believe, yeah, so I believe there's another video, and we'll have to skip over it for the sake of sound and time. But it just goes a little bit more into brain architecture and epigenetics. So what we're going to talk about right now is epigenetics, which is, this kind of breaks into our message of hope and how epigenetics work. So I won't go super deep into epigenetics and what that does, but basically epi means above, and then genetics. So if we look at like the blueprint of our genes and kind of like a big map of how our genetics are laid out, there can be certain things that happen in our body and due to our circumstances and different things that we've been through that might cause us to behave in a different way from maybe somebody that is an identical twin from us. And so doing certain things now, and that's what this whole section on resilience is going to talk about, initiating certain behaviors now can physiologically change our genetics for future generations. So if you have an identical twin and they're a smoker, but you're not a smoker, those genetics or whatever is happening with the lungs and the smoker, that can be passed down in their generations. But if you're choosing not to smoke, that will be passed down in your generations. And one way I've heard it explained is if you make, you know, if you're from a family of like non-athletic people and you make the choice to maybe you're going to go jogging 3 times a week, those kind of health benefits can be passed down to future generations. And that's basically the gist of what epigenetics are. And that's what the video would have explained. But that's something that can increase our resilience. So let's look at individual forms of resilience to become, and the word resiliency, I like to think about like a rubber band, okay, versus a toothpick, okay? A toothpick isn't going to experience much resilience, okay? It's very thin. It's made of like a thin little wood. It can just snap. But a rubber band can take quite a bit of stretching, and it's malleable, moldable to kind of experience more stress on itself. It's kind of what it's made out of. Another way I like to think of it is in Asian countries, bamboo can also be used as a scaffold because it is an incredibly resilient wood and it can kind of flow with the wind. It can, it's very, but it's also very strong. So I like to think of resilience kind of like that. It's able to have different forms of stress or different forms of pressure on you without breaking or snapping in half. So under individual circumstances to become more resilient, these are just some basic things that you can do. Eating healthy foods, making sure that you have good sleep hygiene, having an exercise regimen, listening to good music, practicing meditation or yoga, seeing a trauma-informed therapist, expressing feelings like music, art, or words, mastery of a skill. So I've heard throughout this quarantine and the pandemic, a lot of people have started maybe trying to learn another language or picking up on a skill or something like maybe a new exercise that was something that they didn't do in the past. And it's something that can increase your resilience. Also having supportive relationships. These are all things that do something that increase something in our brain called neuroplasticity. And basically neuroplasticity is exactly how it sounds. So plasticity, like being able to move and being able to change, that's what plasticity means. Neuro, which is our brain, so basically our brain being able to change and be able to adapt to different circumstances. All of these things on this list, engaging in these different things can build our epigenetics to more positive outcomes and physiologically change the brain. And so there is a little video that I won't be able to show you guys today, but basically just kind of explains how that works. And we'll skip over that. But the way I like to think of it is if you think about a car driving around in the sand, okay? Think about like a Jeep. And you're driving around in the sand of, say, like you're down on the beach and you're driving around in a circle in the sand. Every time you go around, that divot is going to get deeper and deeper. But the moment that you decide, I'm going to turn my wheel and get that wheel up and out of that ditch, it takes quite a bit of effort, but you can get that wheel out of there and eventually form a small, thin little path and to make another circle. And basically neuroplasticity is that immediate change of I'm in this habit, this pattern of behavior, and it's taking that first step, getting out of that path and then building another pathway to something else potentially more positive. And it's it can be tough to make that initial change because it's changing your body chemistry, it's changing your brain channels, but it can happen, and it's basically building those neural pathways and strengthening them by routine. So one thing that could be really helpful is something called mindfulness. What mindfulness is gonna do is it increases gray matter in your brain, doing different things that helps your learning, cognition, memory, emotional regulation, perspective taking, empathy and compassion, decrease brain gray matter in areas controlling fight or flight, anxiety, fear, or stress. So that thing, the stress response we were just talking about, the area of the amygdala, mindfulness is going to really help that prefrontal cortex with our reasoning, our logic, helping us learn healthier ways. And when I think of mindfulness, it's basically how it sounds. It's just being mindful of the different patterns that we're engaging in. And it's taking a moment to pause and consider different things. And there's a lot of different exercises you can do for mindfulness. I'm actually going to guide you guys here in a moment. But one simple example is if you, let's see, if you look at a picture, let me get a book. If you get a picture of something, so we'll look at this picture of this book. Basically, it's kind of acknowledging what is happening. If you're looking at, say, like a painting or something, here's a better example. Okay, we have this picture and you're gonna acknowledge the different things that are happening. It's like, oh, I see that there's some trees right here. Looks like it's snowy. I wonder what's happening. It looks like a Connex that's covered in snow. The artist used watercolor. Wow, look at that thin little line of that mountain ridge. And it's just taking time to notice the different things that are going on. And that's just something simple. So if you're experiencing a stressful or toxic situation, you can look at a picture of your phone and just be mindful about the picture. I know it sounds silly, but it's something that can help our brains slow down and just think about things as they're happening. And it's a really good habit to engage in. Some other things that you can engage in to increase your individual resilience are culture and tradition. So think about yourself, your identity, different things like your family, your bond, traditions and customs, especially like different things that can help engage us in our cultures. It helps us kind of reflect on our values. It helps connect generations. It brings a sense of identity to our heritage. It also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but like just kind of helping that family bond. It really can help kind of bring a meaning to who you are. If you don't have any traditions and customs, like potentially making a tradition or custom with a mentor or somebody that's part of your support system, something that you do every year, that can be a very, very beneficial thing to increase individual resilience. It can be something that's done around a holiday or something that maybe you and a friend do that's important. Let's see. So moving forward, let's see. Whoops. Technical difficulties. So let's try for ourselves really quick. I'm going to guide you through a mindfulness activity that is just so simple, and we're going to focus on the 5 senses. So if you feel comfortable, I want you, if you're comfortable with it, go ahead and close your eyes. If you're at work, you know, you can just be sitting at your desk and just close your eyes real quick. And I want you to think about a safe place where you feel safe. And it can be a memory, it can be a place that you've gone in a book, it can be a place that maybe you haven't actually gone, but a place that you'd like to go. And we're just gonna think about the 5 different senses in this safe place. So the first thing I want you to do is we're gonna focus on sight. So think about the different things that you see in this safe place. Are you outside? Are you inside? Are you, are there people around? Are you by yourself? Think about different smells that you're smelling in this safe place. Does it smell rich and earthy, or is it more sterile? Are there any foods that you smell? Think about the way you feel. Is it hot or cold? What kind of emotions do you feel inside? What are some, like, is there wind blowing, or are you by a heater? Think about different things that you hear. Is it really busy? Can you hear nature sounds? Can you hear people talking to you? Are there any animal sounds? Is there a loved one with you that's talking to you? And then finally, think about different things that you might taste in this safe place. Are there any foods that you really enjoy that you eat here? Can you taste the air? Is there, does it taste old or does it taste new? Okay, so hopefully, you know, that's something that you can kind of walk yourself through that can bring your heart rate down and just get yourself in a space that is safe and help you kind of reflect on 5 different senses, engaging your body, engaging your brain, that can help calm yourself down and just bring you to a place that hopefully is less stressful. And with more practice, it gets better. There's a lot of different mindfulness activities that you can find online. There's also things like you can do a body scan or systematic muscle relaxation, which I would love to try with you guys, but for the sake of time, we won't be able to. Okay, only have a few more things, to talk about, and then we'll be done. So relationships are huge in our personal resilience as well. So making sure that we have attachment and belonging. So especially for children that maybe have experienced trauma, having supportive relationships are huge. I really believe like mentorship is really important. So programs like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, or being part of like having a good teacher, or having, you know, a trauma-informed counselor, or possibly belonging to like a youth group or a church, that can be a really big deal for a child or for individuals that have experienced trauma. It creates a sense of belonging, worth, value, dignity, self-awareness, self-control, well-being, and healthy relationships. It's going to help somebody learn how to have a healthy relationship, especially if they've never had one. So for parents, it's also important to have protective factors for families. You can help, so, you know, having for parents to have friends, or for parents to have mentors or have social interactions is very, very important. There's a lot of different nonprofits around town. I know of a bunch in Juneau. There's also a bunch like all over the state. So if anybody needs any resources like that, I would be happy to connect you to stuff like that. But just being part of different things like family nights, whether that's something you do in your own home or something you do with other families or something you do as part of an organized program, that's something that can develop family resilience. Possibly being a part of like a faith community or an organization like that can help be a protective factor for families. Making sure that you have friends that are supportive and going to be able to be a resource for you. And then of course, community organizations that can be, you know, whether you're part of a community organization or something that can be like, make sure that you have concrete support in times of need. So having that, that person that is there, that if you're going through a crisis, like you can go to that person or somebody that can help watch the kids. Like I said, if there are, if that is something that you would like to get connected to, I do have resources that I'd be happy to connect you with afterwards. And there's an organization or a program called strengtheningfamiliesprogram.org. If this is something that you're interested in, I'd highly recommend going to that website because they have a lot of different resources on that. finally, one of the last things is community and culture. Language, the language we use with others for being trauma informed is a really big deal. So non-trauma informed language when you're talking to a child might look like, what's wrong with you? Have you brushed your teeth? Is your homework done? It's kind of taking the power away from the individual and putting the power in you and like almost in a talking down sort of way. And a way that you could phrase these questions in a more trauma-informed way would be saying something like, what happened to you? Have you brushed your teeth, or do you still need to do that? So it's giving the power back to the individual to give them more control. Have you had a chance to finish your homework, or do you still need more time? So it's still setting those boundaries, but allowing them to have more control over the process of what potentially needs to be done. For folks that have experienced trauma and potentially deal with addictions, some language that you can use is a person with a substance misuse disorder, rather than saying addict, junkie, or druggie. A lot of people that experience different kinds of substance misuse disorders have experienced trauma. So say a person living in recovery rather than an ex-addict. Oh, maintain recovery versus stayed clean. So trauma sensitive practices, these are some more different ways that you can build resilience in yourself or others. Identify emotions in zones. So like being able to identify when yourself or someone else, like when to give somebody space. The body, when it is activated in an emotional state, it takes 45 minutes for somebody to calm down from that. That's called the refractory period. So maybe being aware when somebody has a highly emotionally charged zone, and when to give them, you know, some time to calm down, and then when to approach that person to maybe help them out or give them resources. Identify ways to self-regulate. So whether that's using like mindfulness or, you know, with a youth, maybe doing a brain gym type thing. Calm corner. A lot of schools are instituting calm corner or comfort carts, which is basically a little zone when somebody is emotionally charged or the amygdala is activated, a place where a child or a person can go activate the five senses by, you know, eating like a stick of gum, or like sitting on a beanbag chair, petting something soft like a stuffed animal, maybe having like one of those aromatherapy little things that puffs out the essential oils. So those are some different things that are in the calm corner. It just helps activate the five senses and helps someone, you know, feel safe and more calm. Breathing can be another way to build resilience. There's something called square breathing, and it's basically where you are going to breathe in for 4 seconds. You can close your eyes, breathe out for 4 seconds, breathe in for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds. So it's kind of like making a square. And while you're doing that breathing, you can imagine building that square, and it's going to slow your heart rate, cause different chemicals in your body to slow down. We already talked about mindfulness. The Calm app, that's really popular. It helps, like, it combines different sensory activities to help slow the brain down. And then brain gym, we kind of already touched on that. So that is all I have for you guys today. This is a really in-depth training. So there's a lot to cover. Honestly, it could go on for probably 3 hours, but that, you know, for the time that we have today, that's all we were able to cover. If there's any questions or any resources I can connect you to, I have a lot of North Star resources, but we're also very well connected in the Anchorage community, as well as communities around Alaska. So if that's something that anybody would like, reach out to me or reach out to NAMI or JSPC, and they can get with me and I can get you stuff. So that's all I have. Thank you, Erin, for allowing me to speak to everyone today. And we have like a minute. Does anybody have a like super urgent question or anything like that?
Haley, that was awesome. Thank you so much. We had a lot of people typing in comments thanking you for your time. had some requests for the videos. I'm gonna
Okay,
do to those folks over email.
perfect.
And then before you got to the part about stress, there's people asking about the connection between adverse childhood experiences and stress, and then you ended up covering most of that, so that was awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much for your time, Haley. This was really, really well done, and I love the graphics that you used. They were very helpful. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And I'll send along the videos in a Google Drive. Erin, can I send those to you? And Mel, I'll send them. Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you all so much. I'll see you guys later.
Yep, bye.
Bye.
Bye.